This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh. The president of Senegal, Macky Sall, who chairs the African Union's, warned the European Union that Africa is facing a food crisis with soaring wheat, fertilizer and energy prices combined with increasing food shortages due to the war in Ukraine. Russia and Ukraine are the largest wheat exporters in the world. During an address on Tuesday, Sall also criticized Western sanctions on Russia, saying they're making it harder for African nations to buy food. The African Development Bank says the price of wheat has already jumped 45% on the continent. And the hunger crisis is being felt across the globe, from Afghanistan to Yemen to Ethiopia. We're joined now by Shannon Scribner. She leads Oxfam America's humanitarian work. Last month, Oxfam released a report with Save the Children and the Jamil Observatory titled Dangerous Delay 2, The Cost of Inaction, which found a person is likely dying of hunger every 48 seconds in drought-ravaged East Africa. Shannon Scribner, if you can talk about the extent of the catastrophe.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. So this dangerous delay report, which is the second report, we did a previous report almost 10 years ago, and that was during the 2011 Horn of Africa drought, where 260,000 people died, half of which were children. And right now in East Africa, across Kenya, Somalia, and Ethiopia, we are on track for 350,000 Somali children to die. So we are actually worse off than we were 10 years ago. And that sobering statistic of every 48 seconds, one person across Ethiopia, Somalia, and Kenya is dying of hunger today.
Shannon, could you explain what the different causes are for this crisis, from the pandemic to the war in Ukraine and the climate crisis?
Absolutely. So we know that the pandemic over the last 2 years plus has had a huge impact just globally and in East Africa in particular. It also has caused prices, inflation to skyrocket. It's caused the supply chains to be interrupted. But we've also had the driest season on record in East Africa. And we knew this 2 years ago because we have early warning systems that are telling us a drought is coming. The rains are failing. Malnutrition is skyrocketing. So we knew this 2 years ago. And then we have the conflict in Ukraine that has really exacerbated the crisis in East Africa as well as West Africa and other places because of the Black Sea exports that are so important to this part of the world, and wheat, especially that's exported from Ukraine and Russia, that is impacting an already exacerbated food crisis.
Shannon, as you mentioned, of course, the blocking of the ports in Ukraine is in large part responsible for the crisis. The other issue, though, insofar as other wheat producers are concerned, among them France, India, and the US, these countries are facing massive droughts, which will or have already resulted in wheat shortages. So could you talk also about the impact, or elaborate on the impact of that, not just the fact that Russia and Ukraine's wheat exports are vastly diminished, but also what's happening as a result of the climate crisis in other wheat-producing countries?
Absolutely. I mean, to stick to the report in East Africa and these countries, so 2 years ago, we started hearing about food insecurity because of the drought. We knew that 3 consecutive rainy seasons had failed. Just in April, we've heard that the 4th rainy season will fail. So there are early warning systems that tell us when a drought is on the horizon. It will tell us when malnutrition is spiking. And so the communities that we've been talking to in those countries are saying, their life is worse off because of the climate crisis. They've had to leave their farms that they can no longer grow anything from, and they're living in internally displaced camps. We have people whose animals are dying. So we had one woman in Somalia who had 150 cows, and she has 2 cows left. And this is the story that we're hearing across the countries. And now people are worried not just about their animals dying, but they're worried about their neighbors and their family and their friends dying because of the famine-like conditions. We also know that this is an extreme time, and it's an extraordinary time, right, with the pandemic, but also with the conflict in Ukraine. But we are on track by 2030 to actually have 560 disasters a year, and that is related to climate change. So I don't know if this is extraordinary times. So we really need a system that is more responsive to those early warnings, that we're investing in those early warnings. We need to act when they give us the information that a drought is coming, that malnutrition is rising, and that animals are dying. And we're not doing that today.
Shannon Scribner, Oxfam released a report recently that a new billionaire has been created every 30 hours since the start of the pandemic, while 1 million people could fall into extreme poverty in 2022 alone. Can you talk about this and also the language that's used? We now say things like food insecure. What does that mean? Why aren't we saying hunger and famine straight out?
So the report that you're referring to is called Profiting from Pain, and it's talking about the 20 million people that have died as a result of the pandemic. And over those 2 years, when we've had so many people dying, we've seen an extreme inequality gap between those that are getting richer and those that are getting poorer. So the quotes of the billionaires and how many people are falling into extreme poverty are really striking at this moment in our history. And what we're finding is in East Africa, for example, it's not that people are working less hard, they're working more hard. They are, walking for miles to try to find water, trying to find a pasture or food for their animals. They are doing everything they can to keep their families alive. They are skipping meals, often one meal a day, and sometimes the parents aren't eating. We know that women are eating last or not at all, and they're also preparing any meals that they can find, and they're also responsible for finding those meals. So the billionaires aren't working harder. It's because of the circumstances of the pandemic that they've been able to make a lot of money. And so we really need to think about that. When we have right now in East Africa, there is a humanitarian assistance, I think it's about 4.4 billion, but we only have 3% of the funding. We have funding going to Ukraine, but not to places like East Africa. And in terms of extreme hunger, there is a classification that looks at malnutrition. It looks at water that's available in houses. It looks at how many meals people eat a day. So there's all these factors that it looks at, and it determines where it is. Is it extreme hunger? Is it famine? And it's called IPC 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And right now in East Africa, we are in 3, 4, and 5, and 5 is famine. So those are the emergency categories based on people's access to food, based on the availability of clean water, and based on the number of calories they're able to take in a day.
Well, Shannon Scribner, we thank you for being with us, leading Oxfam America's humanitarian work. That does it for our show. Democracy Now! Is produced with Renee Fels-Meitberg, Dina Guzder, Messiah Rhodes, Nermeen Sheikh, Maria Tarasena, Tammy Warrenoff, Camille Baker, Tarina Nadura, Sam Alkofte, Maria Studio, John Hamilton, Rabbi Karen, Hani Masood. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh. Stay safe.